Hello everybody, welcome to this WFA webinar on ad production and decoupling. It's great to have you all attend. We have a lot of attendees online right now, and I think we're welcoming people from Paris, from Shanghai. I'm looking through the participants from Singapore, Bangkok, Dubai, all across Asia, and across Europe as well. And a few people also I see joining us from the US. So some very some night owls joining us from the US, which is great. I see lots and lots of familiar names, so thank you everyone for participating in this. Just by way of logistics and just to let you know exactly how this is going to work. So we have our friends from APR who are going to take you through loads of content for you. We've got around about 45 minutes or so of content, and we're going to try and factor in some Q&A at the end of today's session. So in your browser window, you should see a chat box at the top that I can see lots of questions and comments already appearing in. Beneath that, you've also got a Q&A widget in which you can post some questions that I will then take, and we'll ask those of our friends from APR towards the end of today's session. So if you've got any comments or any chat that you'd like anybody to see, that can go in the chat window in the top. If you've got any questions that you'd like to pose, feel free to put those in the widget below. I think the question that always gets asked is, are these slides going to be available? And yes, they are. We can show those following this webinar. They'll also be available on our knowledge base. So for those WFA members who haven't yet gone online and got a password to log on to our knowledge library, suggest you do that. You can send us an email, send me an email, send Natalia an email, and you can get your password for that and get access to the slides afterwards. This webinar is also being recorded, so we'll have the audio from this, and you'll be able to therefore hear some of the Q&A session at the end in a recording which we'll see on YouTube and also within our knowledge base. So today's topic is of course one which is very important for a lot of procurement people right now. We ask a question of our network every year: what are the most important categories that you're looking at? And production is always within the top two. I've been doing I've been asking that same question of our network every year for the past 5 or 6 years, and production is consistently one of the categories that marketing procurement specialists are most interested in. So we've in the past done lots of research in this area. We've done lots of surveys, and it consistently is something that we survey our network and benchmark on. And this year we've also done a piece of research in partnership with APR, specifically on this topic, specifically on the topic of sourcing production and looking at decoupling trends. And so some of that research you will have seen. It's been sent out to our network, but we'll be focusing a little bit on the implications of some of those questions that we asked and some of the answers given within today's session. So APR are going to draw on some of those results and some of that data within today's session. So with that, I'll pass it over to our friends from APR. By way of introduction, APR are partners of WFA, and we've worked with them very closely over the past couple of years, I think, guys. And we're delighted to have them present today. So with that, chaps, thank you very much indeed for joining us, and I'll throw control over to you, and you guys can crack on.
Great. Thank you, Steve. Welcome, everybody. Good morning, Europe, and good afternoon, or good evening, early evening, Asia Pacific. My name is Eric Drury, and I am the Managing Director of APR Asia Pacific. I'm joined by Luke. We'll do our introductions, but before that, I wanted to just take you quickly through the agenda of what we're going to be talking about over the next half hour. We'll start with the evolution of ad production sourcing. So how have we procured or bought ad production in the past? What does that model look like? And what are the benefits of that? We'll talk specifically about decoupling as a solution in sourcing ad production. We'll talk a little bit also about digital asset management and the tools and the technology that exists today that your suppliers are providing in the ad production space. And then we'll talk about the alternatives. As content is changing and evolving, there are alternatives to sourcing this ad production. So we will go through all of that, and we'll base a lot of the content on the survey that many of you took part in. So with that, I will continue my introduction. I am the Managing Director of Asia Pacific, also the head of our Global Experiential Department with APR, and I am joined by Luke Beecham.
Good morning, everybody. Afternoon and evening. I'm Luke Beecham. I'm the MD of the EMEA region, but I'm also the brand executive producer for APR. So I look after many of our European and some of our global clients as well. So it's interesting to have your insights through the survey into how you're approaching ad production sourcing. So we look forward to sharing some of our thoughts with you.
Great. One quick slide on who APR is or who we are. We are a production consultancy. We're the largest consultancy in the world. We only say that because it gives you an idea of the kind of volume that we see. On the right, you see that we see over $1 billion US in ad production spend annually. And we see that from a lot of different clients, a lot of different regions, different approaches to producing. We've got over 100 consultants across the globe with an average of 24 years experience in the production space. So these are producers that are consulting. And we've got currently 41 clients and working with 132 agencies. And obviously, we oversee all kinds of content production, be it moving image for TV, online video, still image, etc., digital, of course, and more and more we're seeing experiential. So, as Steve said, we are also the official production partner of the WFA, and one of the outputs of that partnership are the surveys that we work on and the webinars that we're doing today. Now, before we get into some of the survey, we wanted to provide a little bit of context and look at what the traditional sourcing model looks like. And on the left here, you see that there are the client, and this is starting with the client where there's a brief. What are you going to produce? What do we need to produce? What kind of budgets do we have? What is the timing that we're looking at? And the client is working with a media agency and usually another partner, the agency of record, typically in the traditional model, to help all collaborate on a strategy and planning to produce creative. And when this creative, the creative is then applied to the specific strategy, and you go into production. Once you've produced your master assets, you go into post-production to clean everything up, make it nice and shiny, and then it's delivered to the markets, delivered to your media outlets, to the different platforms. And if you are a global brand and you are producing multiple assets for multiple regions, then you will have a step in there that is adaptations or versioning or transcreation of those assets. Now that's what the traditional model looks like, and it has worked well for many years. And the other part of this is who is doing this production. So it's usually been the client working, as we said, with a media agency and an agency of record. The agency of record then taking that creative, and a production company doing the production of the assets, be it moving image, still image, digital, etc., and a post house. This is a little bit moving image centric, but a post house doing that work either via a production company or independently. And then the agency of record in years past has often handled the adaptations and the versioning, working either with their local market network agencies or having the post house do that as well, and then either managing the distribution themselves or going directly to a distribution company and or having a post house sometimes do that distribution and delivery. So that's what it looks like today. Anything you want to add, Luke?
No, I think that's always worked particularly well with the traditional media assets, TV, key visuals that we've been asked to producers over the years, but as the media channels have fragmented and we're looking for different assets, then the evolution was necessary.
Right. So if we look at this, if from a procurement standpoint, you see a lot of suppliers and they all say that they do production. And what we do is we try to define that a little bit more specifically, because if everybody's doing production, what specifically are they doing in production? So we use these terminology specifically here: primary production. So primary production is the production of a master asset when you're going to produce the master 30-second TV commercial or 60-second commercial or key visual or master banner, etc. And then PP1 is post-production, and that is the post-production of that master asset. PP2 is further post-production, taking those master assets and adapting them, making different versions, transcreating them for different languages, and then going into distribution. So this is just a little bit of updated terminology so that when you're sourcing these different elements of your ad production, you can talk a little bit more specifically about it. Now, this, in the beginning, this is what it looked like. It was the client who was leading from the front, but as soon as the strategy was determined, the agency of record took over, developed the creative, managed the entire process, hiring the production companies, hiring the post houses, overseeing the adaptations and versioning, and making sure that the assets got out to market. That's where we started. That was, for many years, it's been this way with the full service agencies. And the benefits of this were that you as a client had a single point of contact. You knew who was responsible for the whole supply chain. You had good brand stewardship. You had somebody looking after the creative integrity of your brand. And there was a quality control aspect to this model as well. As procurement, as production became more important, and you see a lot of spend and big numbers in production, and you start to dig around a little bit, you see that at the end of this supply chain, you're looking at transcreation and versioning, and you notice that your agency might be using high-end post houses to do some of these adaptations and these versions. And you notice that you might be spending more money than you necessarily need to spend at this end. And so this was one of the first areas that we, as procurement, as purchasing, we started looking at is the transcreation and saying, is it necessary that my agency of record really takes on this control of this part of the process? And so this is one of the first areas that came under scrutiny, is the transcreation.
And also from a marketeer's point of view, making sure that there was consistency of the transcreation and the adaptation of the assets. Because traditionally a lot of it was getting sent out to local markets where they were doing their own versions. So that centralization of the translation and transcreation was becoming more and more important to marketers for that brand consistency.
Right, and the benefits of as we start looking at the different elements more specifically, the benefits that we're getting are trying to make sure that there's consistency across the process, that we're getting transparency, and obviously the cost consideration to ensure that we're getting lower costs. If you continue to dig, then you might say that, oh, well, now I'm looking at the post and I'm noticing that my agency of record is working with a lot of the same post houses. There's perhaps an opportunity to consolidate some of this work and take more control over who we're working with, or formalize a relationship that has existed with the agency and say that, well, we're working with you quite often. Let's put a deal in place. Perhaps it's a rate card, perhaps it's a preferred vendor. And so this area of the supply chain was then comes under focus, and we're getting a little bit more transparency and clarity on what's being spent, who it's being spent with, and how it's being spent. And if we keep digging a little bit more, you look again back towards the transcreation and you say, well, actually, we're distributing, we're delivering to the markets, but this is being done by my transcreation house, and I'm not sure they have those capabilities, so they must be outsourcing. So what if I take a look at this distribution and delivery and see who's doing this for my transcreation house, and is there an opportunity for me to look more closely at these costs as well, and perhaps formalize some sort of arrangement there as well. And then finally, you come to the point where let's look at the production company, because typically if we talk about TV production, 70% of my budget is being spent with these production companies. So again, it makes sense to look at this part of the supply chain very closely, see who I'm working with, how I'm working with them, do I engage with them directly, what kind of relationship does my agency have, am I using the right production? So over the course of a few years, 5-10 years, we've been able, from procurement standpoint, to look at each element and each component of the supply chain and say, you know, what does this mean to me? How am I procuring this? How am I sourcing this? And what does that mean in terms of strategy? Is this the right way to produce it? Is it the right way to source it? And right now, we're not talking about decoupling yet. What we're talking about is looking at each element, taking a closer look and saying, is it a preferred vendor deal? Is it a rate card? Is it just due diligence and saying that I need to see backup and I need to see what the costs look like? And obviously, the result of this, the benefits of this, as we said, are control, consistency, transparency, lower cost, and more importantly, speed to market. Now, this is the evolution of the model, and it is also what most clients that we see are working to this same model. Although, as we go through the presentation, you'll see that it's changing rapidly.
Yeah.
So a recap is pre-80s. The full service agencies, and then little by little, some parts of the supply chain are being looked at more closely, and deciding to apply specific sourcing strategies to each part of these of the supply chain. So now getting to our first survey result, if we look at the results that we've had from the WFA members, we can see that this is the traditional media channels, so the TV specifically, where marketers rely more heavily on their agencies to source and manage the suppliers. You can see in the blue with the radio, the TV broadcast, and the cinema, etc. This is where you as brands are really relying on your agency to manage those relationships and decide who to work with. And as we get closer to the print and to the non-broadcast TV and videos, so the social media videos, the online videos, and the digital web and events and experiential, then because they're newer media, newer ways of production, it's been more of a collaborative approach between you, the brands, and your agencies in determining how you work with your suppliers and who you work with.
And the E&E events and experiential is certainly a newer area where the collaboration is greater, but clients traditionally have taken that lead. Right, and then there may be well, we'll move on. We'll talk about now decoupling as a production sourcing strategy. So we looked at the context. That first part was just to give you context on what the supply chain looks like and what kind of sourcing strategies have been applied over the years. And now we'll look specifically at decoupling as a production sourcing strategy. Who's doing it? Why are we doing it? And what are the benefits of it? But before that, let's do a poll. So, Steve or Natalia?
So I'm going to jump in. Yeah, so I'm going to jump in now. And Natalia's just launched a poll because we're interested just to get your thoughts on this. So there's a question up there which is asking, in your organization, does decoupling carry a positive, neutral, or negative connotation? And I suppose really sort of what we're asking there is just a reflection on I suppose the level of resistance that you see in marketing. Does marketing feel that there's a loss of control here, that they feel there's additional complexity and they're a bit resistant to that change and new ways of working, or does kind of procurement's desire for transparency and slightly more linear workflow processes just mean that there's greater focus on the processes, but also the costs, and so you're able to look at slightly different ways of working with agency partners. So I think most of you guys have voted now, so we can share those poll results. So you can see that I suppose there's it's good to see that there's very little by way of negative connotation there. A lot of people saying positive, or neutral. I suppose it's encouraging that. In fact, that's going up even as I'm looking at it now. So sort of 50% of people saying positive, around about 40% saying neutral. It's good to see that, because it does show that there's the ability for internal marketing teams to be flexible on this. Historically, there has been resistance, but I think that the efficiencies and the benefits definitely outweigh some of the negative connotations here. So guys, what's your sort of thoughts on that? That's good news, right? Because that does show that there's generally a desire amongst the client community to try new ways of working.
Right. I would say
Absolutely.
it's great news. Right. And I think part of it is the fact that it has now become more commonplace and marketers are used to it. To be honest, I think the negative connotations would come from the agency. That's who are the most resistant, because they see a part of their business being taken away. We'll see later in the presentation that they found a way to make sure that they're still part of that equation. And marketing, perhaps in the past, have been a little bit more resistant. But again, decoupling is not new, and I think it has lost a little bit of its negative connotation. So it's very good to see the results of that poll. So now let's continue on to talk about decoupling and really understand what we are talking about. So decoupling, as defined by the WFA, is the unbundling of the marketing supply chain. So that supply chain that we've just seen is to unbundle it into various components, which can then be sourced and managed individually. And this can be applied to all types of production, so media, web, digital, etc. So looking again at this supply chain, imagine if you took each one of these and you took it away from the responsibility of your agency of record, and you sourced it and you managed it independently. There's a whole host of challenges with that approach, but that's what it means. If we look at the next survey question, the response that we had from the WFA members is that, well, let's go back one second. If we look, an important part is that decoupling is not a single definition. So it can be taking each one of these elements separately and sourcing and managing it independently. It can be bundling a few of those and managing those via another partner, etc. But there's many different ways to decouple. And one of the questions that we asked in the survey is, which of the different ways to decouple have you tried? And what we see here is that almost 2/3, 60%, have tried or are engaged in financial decoupling, and that is perhaps the most. It's perhaps the simplest and least obstructive from an agency standpoint and from a marketing standpoint, because it really is behind the scenes and it's setting up from an admin standpoint the contracts and the vendor supplier side to engage, allow you as a client to engage directly with your vendors. And so that has been one of the most popular, and that's a trend that we've seen from our clients as well.
Yeah, I think on the project-based decoupling, the trial approach, there has to be a degree of caution and a great degree of trust and respect between the client and the agency, because if you start on that journey of taking some of the responsibility away from, and maybe some of the finances away from your agency, to then bring them back into the fold, needs a good degree of courtesy and planning, because once you set up on that route, it's sometimes difficult to regroup with your agency and have the same relationship.
Right, we like to say that you don't get a second chance. You have to get it right the first chance, because a lot of the decoupling is change management. You're not only asking your agencies and your vendors and your suppliers to work in a different way. You're asking your marketing team. You're asking yourself internally to work a different way, and a lot of people are resistant to change the way they're working. They're very comfortable the way they're working, and so this change management aspect is important, and that's why we do suggest that you plan and try on a pilot project, perhaps build success stories, lay the groundwork, and start your decoupling journey that way. There are plenty of instances of clients who have decided to decouple a specific part of their business on an ongoing basis, and this happens as we've referred to, from the transcreation of the translation side of things, from the distribution, insurance, post-production, etc. You've decided that this is a piece of business that functions fine without going through your agency of record, and you've got complete control over it. You manage it well. You have cost transparency, etc. So this is just an example of a poll from one of the poll questions about which parts of decoupling you are engaging in. Very few, or more and more, are engaging in all-in decoupling, but we see that's a trend that will continue to rise, especially in certain parts of certain pieces of content, such as social, digital videos, etc. Another survey question is, what media have you carried out decoupling projects in? And almost 2/3 of the respondents you see here have decoupled TV broadcast. And we're thinking that this might be because TV and broadcast is perhaps the biggest spend for most of our clients. And so this is obviously an area of focus and an area where procurement wants to take a look and say, hey, how are we spending? Is there a better way to do this? Is there a better way to manage our spend? So you see that it is a big percentage trying decoupling on TV broadcast. And then we come to digital. And digital has only been part of the poll since 2013, but we see that that's increasing. The mobile, social media, etc. And indeed, one of the ways that decoupling is taking place in digital world is clients bringing this production in-house. So really taking it away from the agency of record, and some of the social aspects are being brought in-house and being completely controlled by the marketing team and the brand internally.
And with the print and the outdoor, we're seeing a decrease, and we're putting that down to the fact that that was probably the first part of decoupling that clients took control of, and therefore it's necessary that most clients who are going through a decoupling will have already done that.
Right, and continuing on to the next survey question, what benefits? So why are you decoupling? What benefits are you getting from decoupling? And we see some consistency in the responses year over year, and that implies that there's a consensus that decoupling creates greater cost transparency, greater control over your agency costs, and as a result, better value from your suppliers. So you see here on the left, the big benefit is that you're gaining control and better visibility into your costs.
It's also nice to see a closer alignment with marketing. It's something that's increasing.
Right, and that's a question, is the chicken and egg. Is there a closer alignment between marketing and procurement because of decoupling? Or is that alignment coming before you decouple and say that we need to work better and more closely together? So let's figure out how to do things and perhaps explore decoupling as an option. If we look at the benefits from a specific savings and efficiency standpoint, the poll result, or sorry, the survey results that we're seeing, we've got two things here. One is the best savings. So out of all these different outputs, creative development, translation, talent hiring, insurance, all the different ways that you can decouple, all the different elements that you can decouple, where are you seeing the biggest savings? And here, it makes sense that the greatest level of savings would be seen on the bigger ticket items, the bigger spend items such as broadcast production and creative development, and the traditional post-production, etc. And that's one of the reasons I think that procurement might have a clue that hey, we're not exactly sure how our money's being spent. We want to see if we can spend it better. And when you see a savings of 70%, perhaps on a single project, that makes you say, hey, actually, you know what, we were right. That there is room for savings and efficiencies, and perhaps my agency of record is not spending my money as efficiently as they could, but you have to look at it from another standpoint as well, as perhaps the partners that you're working with are really giving you their best price and really trying to get their foot in the door and are not charging you as much as they would if they were an ongoing partner and were working on your business. But here we see that there are some big savings opportunities on specific projects.
One of the things that I was actually I took out of this chart here is that there's a lot of conversation around, has decoupling had its day? The efficiencies to be gleaned from this, reaching a plateau, and have we sort of seen as much as we're going to see here? I mean, what this tells you is that some of the best savings have been generated this year in decoupling versus in previous years. We're not seeing a dropping off in terms of the savings that people are able to generate here. They may be clustered in slightly different areas, but there's certainly still mileage to be had from looking into this area.
Indeed, and while there are a lot of clients and brands that are attempting to decouple, there are also a lot of brands that have not yet done it. So there's still a lot of opportunity out there. This is a different look on this next survey question. A different look is talking more about averages, and then obviously here you see that the savings are a little bit more lower. Still significant. We're seeing 20%, 15-20% pretty much across the board. But if you look at the new areas of web development, web hosting, and to the right of the graph, you see the non-broadcast TV and the transcreation, etc. There are still, in 2013, when digital was becoming more prominent, those were big savings on average. Now, important to note that there might be big percentage savings on average when you're looking at 40%, but in real terms, they still don't they still don't achieve the real money savings that you're going to get from the bigger ticket items like TV production, etc. And as Steve said, well, if you look at the difference between 2013 and 2016, you see that once you make those average savings, then you get to more consistent and normal rate of about 15 to 20% on your decoupling savings and efficiencies. And this is measured against using your agency of record. Another way to quantify, another poll question is about quantifying the benefits of decoupling. And this is just another way to show that the real value that we're seeing is the production unit price. So again, it is a cost savings. And it's nice to see that a benefit of this is the process improvements and time efficiency, because it's not just about cost. And we do know clients who take on decoupling not solely to get the cost down. That's a benefit, but really because they've decided that the traditional model that their agency is working to is not the best in terms of getting to market quickly or getting through creative development in less than 3 months. And so they've decided to decouple to overcome some of these challenges, and as a benefit, they are getting better costs.
And are more involved in the process throughout and feel there's a greater ownership of the output.
Right, and Luke, do you want to talk about the time frame?
I think that, yeah. The time frame for decoupling and getting involved is dependent on project and client involvement. But we've seen very rapid decoupling happen, which is immediate cash benefits. But the long term over sort of 1-2 years, it's encouraging to see that clients are prepared to wait that length of time and understand that it's you're turning around a big tanker, and that clients are prepared to put time and money up front for a long-term gain. So it's quick wins on some low-hanging fruit, but ultimately the cost benefits are over a much longer period of time.
Great. I'm looking at the time and notice we're going to speed up a little bit. So the next survey question is, who's managing your decoupling efforts? And here it's really nice to see that there is a joint effort between marketing and procurement, and this is reflected in the previous slide where one of the previous slides where we showed that one of the benefits of decoupling is a closer engagement between marketing and procurement, and this absolutely has to happen. One of the biggest questions that we have, though, is once the decoupling model is applied and you're moving into a new way of working, who is managing that ongoing relationship and who's managing that new system and that new model? So it's good to work together to get through the decoupling, but after decoupling it happens, how are you working with with your marketing teams? Because while there are obviously benefits to decoupling, there are challenges too. And we've identified more than 70 potential responsibilities that in the traditional model, your agency of record is handling for you. From creative decisions to managing the vendors to owning the bidding process, those are elements of the production process and supply chain that you need to identify and say, who is responsible for this now? If I'm shifting away from my agency of record, who is responsible for that now? So there are challenges that you need to be aware of when you are sourcing your ad production in a different way. Now, we want to make a quick glance to the side and look at decoupling from the supplier side, because decoupling has not only been the client saying, hey, I think I can get a better deal. I think I can work better with my agency or with my vendors than my agency does. It's also come upstream from suppliers who are saying, I have or we have a specialty, we have a focus in an area of expertise that we can offer you, and we've got dedicated software and a technical expertise that allows us to work more efficiently and at lower cost. And these are also one of the reasons that decoupling has become more attractive, because you've got solutions out there. And if we talk specifically about the technology side of things, there are so many different workflow platforms that you come across when you are working. Sorry, I don't see the animation, but there's workflow platforms, tools and technologies, and data capture at every phase of the production process. So a lot of data that's being captured, and a lot of information that's going across a project. And one of the trends we're seeing is the consolidation of marketing services. So these companies and these vendors bundling together and saying, hey, if we're distributing your assets, we're also storing them in our digital asset management system, so we can also sell you a digital asset management services. And vice versa. I'm selling you a digital asset management system and I'm doing a deal with a distribution service, and therefore I can bundle these services. If that's happening, it's not necessarily a bad thing, but we would recommend that you understand what is exactly being provided by who and what you're paying for each part of for each of these services, even if they are being bundled. And one of the questions that we see from a digital asset management question in the survey is that 85% of the clients obviously are using an asset management system. Some are using it internally, some are using it externally. The point, we think, is that there is a asset management system in place, but it's really becoming commoditized, and it's being incorporated into a larger workflow system. And so it's really about understanding which asset management system you're using, who is managing that for you, and how to make sure that it's being used to maximum efficiency. Now, the last part of this is to say that if this model that we've just seen is what if it's no longer relevant? What if the traditional model is no longer applicable because you're producing so much more content for your social, your digital media, because you need to get to market much quicker, because you have always on content that you need to produce? What does that look like? What if decoupling is actually the norm? So one important part of this is the creative. In the earlier models, we looked at the creative as being handled by the agency of record solely, but today there's so many different options in terms of where you can get your creative. Obviously, you can get it from your agency of record. You can also get it from an independent agency. Crowdsourcing is common. User-generated content is increasing more and more. You can come up with your creative in-house. You can hire freelance creatives to work on your business. You can refresh existing creative, or go directly to a production company. So if you look at that first part of the supply chain that we've talked about, where you get your creative is going to have an impact on how you source the production and how the production is managed after that. So that's something to think about. One of the trends that we're seeing is project-based agency relationships. And one of the things that your agency of record we talked about earlier is a brand steward. They're guarding the creative integrity of your brand. If you go to a project basis with your agency and decide that this is the better way to manage your cost, you also have to understand that you now need a solid infrastructure on the client side to support getting creative from multiple sources. So you really have to have a good process in place, good standards, good tools and templates, guidelines and way of working in order that you can apply your model to this new agency rather than having a new agency dictate the production model that you're going to use.
It certainly works very well for the more agile content that you might need to produce rather than perhaps your long-term branded content.
Right, and we talked earlier about the administrative functions that the AOR used to handle. So again, these need to be accounted for, and it needs to be very clear whose responsibility these admin functions are. We talked about in-house resources as well. And again, Luke can talk a little bit more about what that means from a technical standpoint. But just because you're bringing cost in-house does not mean that you can forget about managing the cost. You still want transparency because the return on investment, or the ROP, the return on production, needs to be measured to make sure that this is the right model, that you're still getting the best benefits from your spend.
Yeah, I think with bringing resources in-house, it's a balance between the investment in people and hardware versus your competitive advantage for outsourcing. So do you bring in your top tier technologists to give you insight into what you need to do? Do you bring in creative resources who are of a higher caliber to help you create your creative strategy? And then do you continue to directly outsource your services to the open market? Or on the social side, do you start to bring in people who are going to work in-house with your own equipment, build your own studio? And then the question with building your own studio is, how much do you scale up? Are you able to turn the tap on and off as your brands demand? And do you lose some competitive advantage over time by keeping all of that in-house? So it's quite often useful to talk to a third party, somebody who's done it before, or to consultants about what the balance is of free market negotiation versus in-house control.
Right. So this one of the points here is that decoupling, from a theoretical standpoint, it's great, but once you actually get into the details, there's so many ways to decouple that you really do need a specific sourcing strategy to say, hey, if we're going to source our ad production in this way, what is our strategy behind it to make sure that it's the right model and the right approach for us. So one of the big issues when we talked about decoupling was, if you move to a different agency or you move in-house, what is your relationship like with your agency? And here, the poll question, the survey question that we asked, it overwhelmingly that the agency relationship remains, the agency remains engaged in and responsible for delivering the campaign. And that makes sense. They do. That is their strength, is creative integrity, and so it makes sense that they are still engaged in the production process. Even if they're not paying the suppliers directly, or even if they're not managing them directly, they still do have a role in overseeing the creative. That might be more applicable to the traditional TV things, but to have a creative agency maintain creative integrity on an Instagram post, perhaps that's not exactly what needs to happen today.
But if you're producing in an integrated way, then that it is important to have somebody who has that creative synergy.
Right. And we've just got a couple more slides here. One of the other survey questions is, do you agree with the following statements that decoupling, first question is, has decoupling damaged the relationship with our creative agency? And overwhelmingly disagree. It's not the case. We've seen very few instances where it has damaged the the relationship, and it has not damaged the creative either. And we've got examples, plenty of examples with clients working in a decoupled model, and they're still working very well with their creative agency, and they're winning creative awards. So it doesn't damage the creative integrity, and it doesn't damage the relationship with the agency. One of the other points that we bring out here is that the internal marketing teams need to change as well. Again, if you're asking everybody down the supply chain to work differently, you also need to ask yourself and your marketing team and internally, you need to really change the way you work, because you can't work the same way you've worked if you ask everybody else to work differently. So this here is just a quick idea of what a new model might look like if you're producing always-on content, if you're producing social media posts and social media videos every week, etc. A lot of clients are looking at a way to create a tailor-made content factory. And this can happen different ways, working with different resources, different suppliers, and combining them, bundling them in different configurations. But the overwhelming strategy or vision behind this new model is that we as a brand need to pump out content. We need a factory that just generates content. And what is the best way for us to do that for our specific type of content, our specific type of creative, for our markets and our regions, and for the media platforms where we're most relevant. So that this is more of a vision of the new ad production model and what it looks like if you're going to source that, if you're going to make your own content factory. What does that look like, and how are you going to source that? One of the ways that brands are doing that is they're being asked to work with agency-owned production facilities. So we talked earlier about the fact that the agencies didn't want to be out of the system, and they found a way to remain in the system by setting up their own production facilities. And we have a lot of experience working with these facilities. They're expanding their services offering. They're producing good work. They do have different models and different philosophies in terms of how to approach this. But what we would say here is that definitely look at these guys as options. But there are also so many other different options that are out there that aren't necessarily associated with the agencies that you're working with. And then here in the survey, we see that there are quite a lot of clients who are using the WPP production group. And that we've got 8 minutes, and so this is the last slide. That one of the survey questions was, do you use external consultants to help manage the production? Quite a few, 69% use production experts, 42% use really cost management specialists. But if you are working to a new model, we do believe also that it is best practice to get some context and some outside opinions on the different options out there, because it's such a fragmented ecosystem in terms of production. There's so many suppliers and so many purporting to do the same thing that it is very helpful to get a different voice on what your options are and how to approach that. So that is, with 7 minutes left, that is the last slide. We hope we gave you a good idea of what the supply chain looks like from a production sourcing perspective, how it's evolved, what it looks like in a decoupling, different decoupling models, and what it might look like tomorrow. And hopefully that gives you some insight into your developing a strategy for sourcing this production for your specific brands.
That's great. Thank you very much, Eric and Luke, for those contributions. We do have quite a few questions, and it falls to me, I'm afraid, to cherry pick the best ones. So if you do have some questions that you'd like to ask, please do put them in, and I will do my best to get to them. Let me jump right in, if that's okay, guys, and just pose some of the ones that are coming through. So one question here from I guess from a sort of a beginner's perspective, or a sourcing 101 perspective. If procurement hasn't been involved yet in ad production, what do you think it can do? I mean, is decoupling too much of a of an ask to get involved with straight away. What are some of the ways in which a procurement person who hasn't looked at this space before can get involved and really sort of help marketing stakeholders?
Well, the first step in the decoupling process, when you decide to decouple, the very first step is the discovery phase. And that means gathering information on what you're producing, what kind of volume, how much you're spending, who are you spending it with, what are you getting for that spend, etc. So there's a lot of data collection in the very first phase. And that's something that we hope that our clients are doing as a normal way of working, that they're collecting their data, they're seeing what they spend. So the first phase before you go into decouple is to really look at your data and then figure out, based on that data, based on the strategy, your marketing strategy, and what you're producing and what you need to produce where, then you can use that data to say what is the best approach to decouple. So we would say that's the first step, and then that will help you determine the following steps in terms of which model you decouple, or which element of the supply chain you decouple first. Do you decouple everything at once? We really don't suggest that. But it is an option. So that's the first step.
Yeah. Okay. I'm going to move across a few different themes here. In terms of, so when we are in a decoupled scenario, we absolutely want our agencies to retain ownership. One question came through here, which is quite interesting. How do you then, what agency resources, how do you get the agencies to actually retain ownership? Because it's what we want. The agencies want to retain control as well. That's going to result in great work. But how do we actually motivate the agencies to do that when we are effectively saying we're pulling a bit of business away from them for whatever reasons? So how do we do that, and how do we actually encourage the agencies to actually put resources against the retention of the ownership?
I think that comes down to the creative integrity of the agency and the work that they want to produce for you. Agencies love to be seen to be producing good work, and they will almost without exception want to be the guardian of the final output of creative. So they will assist and try and add value where they can, particularly from a creative point of view, perhaps less from a financial point of view, but it's in their interest to make sure that the work is good and that you are happy as a client. And if that means a little bit of investment from them in terms of their time, certainly from, as I say, from the creative guardianship, that seems to be what's happening. The responsibility from what was traditionally the agency producer's role has shifted across perhaps more to, for example, in the decouple model where you're working with one of the larger production agencies to that production agency. So some of the network agencies are moving their TV departments out of the agency and putting them into the post facilities or the production agency facilities, because those people have the upstream skills of working with creative teams as well as the technical skills to manage production at the bottom end. So there's a continuity of the creative and production supply chain, which has been put in place by the network agencies certainly, and the independents are tending to hire people who have good creative minds and the agility to work with agencies, knowing that they have to satisfy the creative criteria as well.
So one question which I suppose touches on the breadth of what we're actually talking about here. So productions can be enormous or extremely micro as content. Marketing, the trends within social show that content can be extremely micro content. We alluded to it before about Facebook posts or Instagram posts. How does that sort of change then the way that you approach something like decoupling? Because projects need to be much smaller or much larger in scope. There's less of a kind of a model that you can just apply. It's much more nuanced than that. So from a procurement perspective, how can we get our heads around that? If we're looking at production and we think, okay, we've tried a bit of decoupling, it's worked here and here, but how can we get our heads around the fact that marketing want massive successful campaigns that's going to help our brands grow, but within that there's elements which are extremely small and very nuanced. And I suppose in some cases a build on that question is, some of this stuff is being done in-house as well. So how
Mm-hmm.
can sort of procurement be effective in that with some of those challenges?
Well, funny enough, inversely, the more micro the output of content, the more macro the brief, because you don't have the opportunity to brief every little piece of content and say, all right, this is the post I want, or this is the Instagram photo I want. What you do is you set out at the beginning of the year the overall vision of what kind of content you're going to be producing, with which tone of voice, and who is your pool of producers or production suppliers who are going to be producing this content. So you work at it from a very macro level at the beginning of the year, and and then the production just flows. And the important part here again is tracking what you're spending, tracking the burn rates, what you've decided to spend with your suppliers, and what you're actually spending, and track that on an ongoing basis. Because neither the fault of marketing or procurement or the agency, a brief at the beginning of the year is not what is delivered at the end of the year. So it makes sense to outline very broadly the brief for some of this micro content at the beginning of the year, track that on an ongoing basis to see that it's being delivered according to the brief and according to the scope of work, and then adjust as you go. And because it's new for everybody, it just makes sense really that we really suggest that you track as much and you capture as much detail as possible, because that's what you're going to be using at the end of the year to benchmark whether you've achieved your objectives, whether you've achieved your cost targets and your content targets and your return on production, and use that information to help you figure out which tweaks to make for the next campaign, the next year.
Yeah. Okay. I see that we're a little bit past the hour, so there's still questions that I'm afraid we haven't got around to. I see some questions about how you guys work, you know, the space that you in particular operate in as production consultants, and how you work with suppliers. And I see questions around KPIs used to select a production house. I suggest maybe some of these are actually questions we can take offline and potentially actually also run some benchmarks on. So so I do apologise we haven't got around to answering everybody's questions, but we will try and come back to those as much as we can do. So guys, with that, thank you very much for sharing so much. That's all really very helpful stuff.